Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Sage's 6th annual Critical Thinking Bootcamp. My name is Meredith Schwartz. I'm the managing editor of CQ Researcher, a weekly report on debates about social and political issues in the news, many of which we'll be talking about today. We have an exciting lineup of speakers who will explore how to navigate misinformation, growing threats to academic freedom, growing threats to scientific funding, and growing threats to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We want to help you get geared up for the start of the fall term and students return to campus. Just want to say this is my third personal critical thinking bootcamp, and they just get better and better. So, today, we're honored to welcome an esteemed group of speakers. Jesse Richardson, founder of the School of Thought. Renee Hill, principal lecturer and associate dean for opportunity, access, community, engagement, and support at the University of Maryland. Bradford Vivian, professor and director of undergraduate studies at Penn State College of Liberal Arts. Beales, owner of Sidedoor Studio, and Sage's own Katie Metzler, vice president of social science innovation, who will kick us off by welcoming you to this event. Take it away, Katie.
Hello, welcome everyone. It's so great to see everyone in the chat telling us where they're joining from. I think we've got people from all over the world today. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Katie Metzler. I'm a vice president at Sage, working across our books program and also in social science innovation. And today I'm joining you from Sage's DC office. Thank you all so much for being here for our 6th Critical Thinking Bootcamp. I've had the pleasure and the honor of joining a number of these events over the years, and I've found the debates and conversations incredibly interesting and inspiring. So since the inception of this event back in 2020, it's become even more apparent that critical thinking skills are essential life skills that we need to be equipping students with throughout their university education. So it's fantastic to be able to devote this time today to discussion and to knowledge sharing. And what an interesting and appropriate time it is to be discussing the essential role of critical thinking in relation to creativity, to academic freedom, in relation to misinformation about universities and colleges, and to young people's education. We have a really fantastic keynote session today, followed by some brilliant lightning talks that I hope will inspire us all to recognize and reflect on the important roles that we each play as librarians, as educators, and as publishers in helping to develop critical thinking skills among students and among our colleagues. So Sage is very, very proud to be able to put on events like this one. We're an independent company, and that means that we are free to invest in developing resources that anticipate future higher educational needs and to encourage the development of critical thinking skills. We've embedded critical thinking skills pedagogy into all of our publishing, and we're very proud to publish a number of resources on critical thinking, including Tom Chatfield's excellent series of textbooks. We also have an online course dedicated to developing critical thinking skills as part of our Sage Campus online courses collection, which is available to libraries. AI has introduced some new challenges and opportunities in relation to critical thinking, and I'm sure we'll be digging into some of that in today's bootcamp. And we're really aiming to engage thoughtfully in the debates around AI in education and to support faculty who are thinking carefully about how to incorporate AI into education in ways that bolster critical thinking skills. At Sage, we're really deeply invested in helping students learn the skills they need, not only to succeed in the classroom, but to go on to be thoughtful citizens who can positively impact society. And so our hope today is that our fabulous speakers will provide insights to support you as you support students. So thank you once again for joining this Critical Thinking Bootcamp. I really hope you enjoy the day. And with that, I will hand back to Meredith to introduce our keynote speaker.
Thank you, Katie, for that resounding reminder of why critical thinking matters and why we're making it the heart of so much of Sage's publishing. Now, please join me, everyone, in welcoming Jesse Richardson, an internationally award-winning creative director and founder of the School of Thought International. With over 25 years in advertising, Jesse now channels his creativity into promoting critical thinking through free, globally used resources. His work blends design and philosophy and is trusted by institutions like Harvard and Apple. Please join me in welcoming Jesse.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming along. So creative versus critical thinking and other false dichotomies is the overarching thing. But I need to take you back about 15 years ago to when I had an epiphany in a fish and chip shop. on my lunch break. I was feeling a little despondent about the world and what was going on in it. It was prescient, as it turns out. And my job at that time was essentially to manipulate people into buying things that they didn't really need, working in the advertising industry. And what I realized is that, well, we need to, if we're to have any hope of navigating this century ahead of us, we need to teach the next generation how to think critically and independently. And specifically, what I realized is that we need to combine the two things that I love the most in the world, and that I've studied the most, which is design and philosophy. And I look to the Greeks, and this another prescient quote from Socrates, where he famously said, "Behold the great many lies on the internet." Very ahead of his time. And what that really kind of showed me is that we need to use what we have in terms of the mediums and the ways in which the world is changing technologically and otherwise to combat the very things that it is bringing up as challenges. So I had this grand vision of combining design and philosophy to create an online philosophy curriculum and make it freely available under Creative Commons. But to be able to do that, I needed to be able to have a proof of concept. So we did this little microsite called yourlogicalfallacyis.com. And the idea here was essentially to do that in a nutshell, to combine design and philosophy by using some of the principles of design thinking to make things accessible and clear and compelling. And so we took 24 of the most common fallacies of logic and made them into single, simple sentences that any 10-year-old could understand, and then made it interactive and taggable such that the website address was yourlogicalfallacyis.com, and you could use /strawman to tag somebody in an internet discussion if they'd committed a fallacy of logic. And we launched this in about 2011, and it went immediately viral and was tweeted by Stephen Fry and Jimmy Wales and a whole bunch of other people, and melted our servers, and we had to scramble to get it all working. And it's now reached over 30 million people worldwide in 7 languages, which was fantastic. And I quite naively at that time thought that someone would come along with a big bag of money and would be able to realize our grand vision. That, of course, didn't happen. And so we kept plodding along, creating more resources. And we did a sister site on cognitive biases, which also went viral, hit the front page of Reddit, was featured in the World Economic Forum and a whole bunch of other places. And so this was a really nice affirmation. But in the intervening time, and especially around about 2016, we started looking at what was happening in the world. And this is my favorite quote. It's from the wonderful Bertrand Russell, who says, "The whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are so certain of themselves, yet wiser people so full of doubts." And what I realized is that we needed to practice what we preached in terms of intellectual humility, because the idea that I started out with was that if we just provided critical thinking tools to people, that would be enough, that somehow that would manifest in a world-changing way that would change, how we operated and give us the tools that were necessary to face this somewhat daunting future ahead of us. But of course, we are complicated beings, and one of the key insights that diving into this literature and talking to academics and thought leaders in this space made very clear to me is that we are social and emotional creatures first, and cognitive creatures very much second. And any strategy that doesn't understand and incorporate that insight is doomed to either fail or be extremely suboptimal. And so we started changing some of the ways we were doing things, and in terms of trying to change mindsets rather than just provide functional tools for people. We launched another website called The Rules of Civil Conversation that helps people to have more productive conversations. And then we more recently launched another website called The Conspiracy Test, which helps people to be able to conduct their own critical thinking investigation into conspiracy theories And rather than waggling a skeptical finger at them and telling them that they're wrong, it encourages them to be metacognitive and reflective, and has proved to be quite successful with a 30% increase, average increase in skepticism as a result of that. So that was one of the things that we sort of changed our mind about. Another was just looking at essentially the ways in which we think and this dimension of critical thinking and trying to define it, working with some of our colleagues at the University of Queensland here in Brisbane. We were examining the intersections of different modalities of thinking, and specifically about convergent and divergent thinking, or critical and creative thinking as they relate to them. And one of the really clear things to my mind working in the creative industries is that we often think about critical thinking as this very deductive, analytical, rational way of looking at things, when the truth is that it incorporates a lot of divergent thinking as well. Picasso very famously said, every 4-year-old is an artist, which is true. We are all expressive artists. But there's a deeper truth underneath that, which is that creativity is part of problem solving. And so it's not just that every 4-year-old is an artist, it's that every 4-year-old is creative. They're willing to play and to explore and to try things and to look from different angles. And this is a really important aspect of critical thinking practice, is to be able to think divergently and to think about all of the what ifs. And so it's important for us to be able to consider that critical thinking incorporates creative thinking as well, and it's multidimensional. Now, on top of the socialization that we have, we also have a school system that teaches us for some 12 years. After we're 4 years old, we go into the system, most of us, and we learn that there's only one correct answer, that to be wrong is a really bad thing to be. And the result of that is that the open, vulnerable, playful, explorative, curious mindset that is typical of creative thought and creative flow states is quashed, and we habituate ourselves to thinking in a much more deductive, reductive, analytical way. And that can be really beneficial for a lot of things, but it's important for us to be open and to understand and to be curious as well. And we lose some of that through the habituation process of the way in which academia and most of the precepts of Western canons of thought are constructed. And there's a lot of potential that we lose. And then we're expected to be innovative when we get into the workforce in the world. So as a result of the last 15 years or so of working in this space, I present to you this somewhat incorrect diagram. And I say it's an incorrect diagram because it's too simplistic. Brains are complicated things, but there is some correlation though. What you're looking at is a representation of 4 different modalities of thought that we've identified as being an underpinning for the ways that we think. A lot of people like to put a rubric or a framework around certain things, and they work to an extent, but what we like to think of as a better way of thinking about thinking is to think about it in terms of weightings rather than absolutes. So the 4 modalities that we've identified here are automatic, agentic, convergent, and divergent. The automatic green modality that you see in the top left of screen here correlates to essentially what would be thought of as system 1 thinking within Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky's model of dual process theory. And so that is everything that's heuristic and central and memory based. And the agentic aspect would be more the system 2 aspects of dual process theory, which is more reflective and has agency and uses, correlates strongly to our prefrontal cortex, our executive function. And then we have these other 2 modalities within, which are somewhat within the agentic modality itself as subcategories, which are convergent and divergent thinking. Convergent thinking is more about being discrete and symbolic and language-based and reductive and logical. Divergent is more context-aware and open. The researcher and author Emma Gilchrist has a wonderful book called Master and His Emissary, which goes into this hemispheric view of things. That is the idea that your right brain is creative and your left brain is logical is, again, too simplistic. But there is some strong correlations in terms of, there are different ways in which we think, and there are neurological correlates to that. What's really interesting is when we look then at, okay, we've got these modalities, these different ways of thinking, and they're sort of directional in a way. Barbara Tversky is a wonderful researcher who has looked at essentially as thought as being relational as its base code, rather than linguistic and symbolic as has been the fashion for the last 100 years or so. I think that's a much nicer way and a much more elegant way to think about thinking, is to think about it as a relational construct rather than as a symbolic construct. Symbols come one step further down the line. And what we have as a result of that is these different weightings. So if you look at any of these mindsets that we're calling them, so a critical thinking mindset isn't purely convergent. You'll see there's a color coding of weights there where it's weighted strongly towards the convergent, but also incorporates much of the agentic, memory-based heuristic thinking and predictive processing, and also divergent thinking. And this is true of all modalities and mindsets of thought, is that it's a mix of different types of thinking together, rather than it being siloed into a clean, clear, absolute way of thinking. So the takeout here is to think about our thinking in a more open way, that critical thinking incorporates creative thinking, and that the complicated and beautifully nuanced way in which brains and minds work is multifaceted and omnidirectional. We have all of these different things going on simultaneously, and they anchor to different waypoints. And the other part that's not included in this is methods. So if you think about modalities as being internal, that's a way in which we think. And then external is a method, say, the thinking hats from De Bono, or design thinking, or systems thinking, or the scientific method is a method of thinking that provokes us to think in a particular way internally using these different modalities and mindsets. And you can see that there's interactions between those. To that end, we have published a bunch of methodological resources at kitted.app that you can access for free under Creative Commons that can provoke different modes of thinking, and that I encourage you to check those out as well. And I'm just looking at my time. I think I'm okay for time at the moment, so I won't go too quickly. But one of the key takeouts I'd like you to take away from this talk is to use what we've developed as a meta framework for thinking skills, which we call the meta thinking process. And that is, in a nutshell, deep, wide, narrow, and up. The deep is about going into, and each of these you'll notice correlate to the 4 colors of the modalities that we looked at before. So allowing those modalities to play to their greatest strengths by sequencing them out. And the sequence is important, and allowing each modality of thought to flourish to its full potential, rather than trying to do all of our thinking simultaneously, where we can sometimes run into problems. And this is where a lot of confusion often happens, is that we try to jump into thinking divergently before we've properly understood what the strategic landscape is or what the background knowledge is. So the sequence is important for a few different reasons. First of all, when we're in the deep mode of thinking, and that correlates to a memory-based modality of thought, our more automated systems. So we want to essentially load all of our thinking canons with this background knowledge that is deep and has a rich understanding of what exactly is going on in terms of the existing knowledge, before we start trying to think divergently or otherwise. So deep is about performing research to gain a deeper understanding of the current state of play. And that could be, understanding who it is that you're talking to, what the historical context is, what other people are thinking about, what the literature says, gaining an appreciation for where we are situated in relation to everything else, historically and otherwise. Once we've done that, we can then focus on divergent thinking, which is allowing ourselves to be into that, to shift into that creative mindset where we're actually opening ourselves up to divergent possibilities and turning off the internal critic that's telling us that we have to get to that one right answer and allowing ourselves to be that 4-year-old again. Then afterwards going to a more narrow convergent mindset and thinking critically about, does this hold up? What's the evidence? Have we considered other possibilities using rationality, logic, and analytical reasoning? And this is probably the most important one, because we like to cling to the first idea that we get that works. It feels uncomfortable to be in a space where we don't know what the answer is. Again, another result of how we train ourselves. We often stop at the first good idea that we have, but the gap between good and great is when we can push beyond and allow ourselves to stay in an uncomfortable state of not knowing and be able to synthesize and iterate and push beyond that which is easy or convenient. Once we've gone through this process, to then take a zoomed out view, use our agentic capacity and modality of thought to be able to think about things from a bird's eye view, and then zoom into the details and move around and iterate and think in both creative and critical ways about what might be possible beyond that which is obvious. I think that's about my 15 minutes. If you want to access any of these resources, you can go to schoolofthought.org or kitted.app, and they're all available. I will stop sharing my screen and talk to you, Meredith.
Thank you, Jesse, for reminding us that clear thinking isn't about choosing just one path. It's about embracing curiosity and using both divergent and convergent thinking together. Your insights challenge us to reflect on how and why we think, and we're grateful for the inspiration. And I have a few questions for you from the audience. The biggest challenge of the future is to select professional and academic courses who are for students to help them choose a career 20 years down the line, particularly since some of the careers of the future 20 years haven't even started yet. We don't know what will be relevant. How do we solve that with critical thinking, especially when AI is taking over so many professions and casting doubt on the future need for humans to do the thinking? Can critical thinking creative thinking play a role here?
I think both is the answer, right? And it's higher order thinking skills generally. And the ability to be able to think strategically, creatively, critically, to be able to think agentically is going to be the currency. The way we're thinking about it is that the knowledge economy is about to become the wisdom economy, because what the knowledge economy represents in many different ways is skills. It's a learned skill. I learned how to use Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop when I was a design student some 30 years ago. And those kinds of skills, or the programs that I work with, being able to code and in TypeScript is a great skill, but it's a knowledge economy skill. And what's going to become much more important is the wisdom economy skills of being able to make discerning decisions and to be able to evaluate things critically and think divergently and creatively, and to be able to use our human thinking skills to be able to pilot the AI systems to make those discerning decisions. So a resounding yes to that. I think both creative and critical thinking are what we need to focus on individually and as a collective for the emerging wisdom economy.
So that question was specifically about higher ed, but we've got a couple different people asking about younger students. At what age of development is a child ready? And should we start this process, say, grade 4 or 5? And what do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, the whole impetus for this project for me was creating some resources for my boys when they're about 8 and 10 years old. And I made a fallacies post to hang in their bedroom. But earlier than that, we lied to them. So I find that lying to small children is a fantastic thing to do, because it teaches them to think critically. And if you need to tell them afterwards that you lied to them, that's an important caveat. So, for instance, we told them that prior to 1965, the world was in black and white, and that where butter came from is every day the sun went down over the mountains, and then they cut that up and then delivered that to the supermarkets to create butter. And so feeding children those kinds of ideas, and then, but you told me it was true. Is that right? Well, you should think for yourself and you ought to question. I think it's almost never too young to do that. And certainly, the more that we can teach children to be philosophically minded, to be critically analytical and to question, the better equipped they're going to be to navigate the strange new world of mis and disinformation that awaits them.
We've got a lot of great questions in the chat, but we only have 1 more minute. So I'm just going to take 1 more and then hopefully we can send you the rest after the fact. How does politics figure into the proposed framework? I'm using politics more broadly to mean what interests are served by a particular argument or approach.
I have a somewhat heterodox view of this, is that I believe that truth has a leveling effect and that understanding can bring us together. I think that the ideological way in which we engage in politics is perhaps counterproductive to our own ends, and that if we can foster understanding through helping people to reflect and evaluate and come to their own conclusions rather than trying to force them to come to ours, that it will be a better world for all of us. And I think I've been guilty in the past of taking that path of having strong things that I believe morally in and trying to force people into my way of thinking or shame them into believing what I believe as a progressively minded person. And what I've learned is that it's a lot more useful to be able to foster understanding, especially in one-on-one conversations. It changes somewhat when you're looking at an aggregated platform and those sorts of things, and placating things that are essentially wrong is a different aspect of that. But I think what we need to do is focus on fostering understanding and bringing people into the fold of understanding rather than excluding them and ostracizing them through shame.
Thank you. And we could have an entire other Q&A based on all the great questions coming in, but we do need to stick to our time. So sorry about that, but thank you everyone. And we'll pass the questions along. They will not get lost. Thank you, Jesse, again.
My pleasure.
Now we move into the lightning talks. I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Renee Hill, Principal Lecturer and Associate Dean at the University of Maryland. With a start in K-12 education and a passion for diversity and library and information studies, Dr. Hill's work focuses on expanding understanding of how information access impacts diverse communities. We're honored to have her here with us today. Welcome, Renee.
Good morning to some, good afternoon to others. It's actually I who have the honor and the privilege of being here. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you for having me. You can see the title of my slide and what I do at the University of Maryland, so I won't read all of that. I will say that I will be reading directly from my notes because I am, like most professors, not known for being short with it, definitely long with it. So I'm going to try to get through this in 5 minutes. In just a few minutes that I have to present, what my plan is to talk about what it means to teach and to model critical thinking during a time when doing so is increasingly challenging. And it's also vital. Next slide. So in terms of my why, I have spent my entire career in library and information science and in education because I believe in the power of informed communities. I have also watched, though, especially in the last few months, how misinformation, how polarization, how attacks on DEI threaten our ability to teach truthfully and hinder people from thinking critically. And this is not just a professional concern for me. This is deeply personal. I have been a K-12 teacher, specifically in the middle school grades, and I am currently a homeschooling parent, in addition to being a higher education instructor. And to say that I am alarmed by the gaps in critical thinking skills that I see at all levels of education is a huge understatement. But that is a webinar in and of itself. Suffice it to say for our time together today, though, that I want my students, including my own children, including my K-12 students, and including my university students, to leave their interactions with me, not just with some skills, but with the strength to challenge harmful systems and the ability to ask hard questions. Next slide. Higher education has always prided itself on being a space for intellectual freedom, a place to challenge assumptions, to ask questions, to rethink what we think that we know. Right now, critical thinking is under pressure. In some cases, it is being actively discouraged or even punished. We are seeing misinformation campaigns that undermine science and scholarship, and DEI programs are being defunded or they're being banned outright. Faculty are facing pressure to avoid controversial topics, and students are absorbing the message that it is safer to stay quiet than to speak up or to think critically. So the question then becomes not just are we teaching critical thinking, but will we still model it when it matters most? Next slide. Sometimes people treat DEI and critical thinking as if they are separate goals, but it is my belief that in practice, these two things are deeply connected. They are intertwined. So examples would be when we ask students to consider whose voices are missing from the archive, when we ask why a cataloging system privileges certain terms over others, when we examine the bias embedded in classification, access, authorship, citations, we're not stepping outside the realm of critical thinking. We are actually stepping into it more deeply. DEI isn't a distraction from objective inquiry. It's a demand for more honest, complex, and informed thinking about how knowledge works and who it serves. It's not about being political, even though there's a really good article by my friends Paul Yeager and Lindsay Sarin that's titled All Librarianship is Political, Educate Accordingly. And this article discusses why neutrality simply is not an option. But I digress. And again, that's a webinar for a whole other day. DEI principles and critical thinking are about helping students to think deeply about how information is created, how it's valued, how it's accessed. Next slide. Students will often ask hard questions, and we want them to do that. And they may be asking from a place of skepticism. And that is not something for us to be upset about or to be irritated by, but it's an opportunity to teach how to think, not what to think. So the question is then, what can we do? Well, first we have to model what it looks like to sit with discomfort, to ask hard questions, and to let our students do the same. When students push back, we can treat that as an invitation and not a threat. We can reframe their skepticism as curiosity, and we can show them that critical thinking isn't about tearing down things for sport. It's about seeking truth, holding complexity, and making thoughtful judgments in a very messy world. Next slide. We have to be honest and know and state that the stakes are high. Critical thinking is being politicized, and DEI is being labeled divisive. Some of us are being told what not to teach. Some of us are being told what words not to use. And our students are watching. They are learning not just from what we assign, but also from what we avoid. And if we go silent, then that teaches them something too. So now more than ever, we have to make space for the messy, the complicated, the uncomfortable. And we need to know that that is where real critical thinking lies. If we do not model critical thinking, who will? And then final slide. I promise I'm almost done. I want to just leave you with this. How are we helping our students and ourselves to think critically when doing so is harder now than it ever has been before? And that's the question that I'm hoping we can sit with when we, who are going to my breakout room, are exploring this together, because the future of our field and of our society depends on the answers to these questions. Thank you.
Thank you. That was extremely thought-provoking. I did drop the link in the chat to that article that you mentioned. But if you have others that you want to share, please feel free. In the meantime, your remarks on the importance of DEI, critical thinking, and truthful education were very timely and very impactful. I'm sure there'll be lively discussion in the breakout session. Next, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Bradford Vivian, Professor and Director of Undergraduate Studies at Penn State College of Liberal Arts. He is the author of Campus Misinformation and other influential works, and his writing appears in both academic journals and major outlets like Time and the Washington Post. Welcome, Dr. Vivian.
Hi, I hope everybody can hear me okay. Thanks for having me. I want to echo the idea that it's an honor to be here. And it's great to see people from so many parts of the world because a lot of what I analyze in the book that Meredith just referred to is admittedly rooted in North America and Europe in terms of misinformation about universities, but I have a feeling it's increasingly global in its reach and impact as well. So I'd be interested to hear about any connections along those lines. The phrase campus misinformation for me refers to an upsurge over the past decade or so around the world, specifically in many places of the Western world, in exaggerations, distortions, hyperboles, and a lot of falsehoods about how universities operate. In terms of major partisan politics, it's become very gainful for a lot of pundits and politicians to spread falsehoods, essentially, about higher education. And so this is a major failure in many ways of critical thinking society-wide and in our media infrastructures, because what universities are supposed to do at their most fundamental level, I think, is spread awareness of critical thinking skills and help the larger population engage in that kind of analysis. So we have a real problem here in that respect, not just for higher education, but for the spread of democratic society, human rights, tolerance, these sorts of values as well. So when I refer to this genre, then that's what I'm describing. Next slide, please, if you could. I'll just kind of offer two major categories of what I look at when I talk about this kind of misinformation and why I believe it's such a threat to critical thinking skills inside of universities and in society at large. So I'm trained in terms of rhetoric and communication. So I look at language that people are using, arguments, and the evidence that they're using to support those arguments to see if connections hold up. And here, then, we can think about rhetorical aspects of misinformation as a broad category. What am I talking about? What am I asking other people to look at and analyze? There's a lot of broad claims which gain a lot of public attention about large groups of faculty or students right now. The idea that all faculty or students presumably are just interested in political indoctrination. This is a nonsensical claim, a very exceedingly broad one that's taken seriously by a lot of pundits and pseudo-intellectuals and political actors. There's a famous phrase in propaganda and misinformation studies called glittering generalities. It's when not only that broad claims are being made, but large sorts of references that overwhelm critical thinking capacities scare people, make them panicked, and so forth. So in North America and in Europe in particular, if these historical references make sense, there's a lot of comparisons. For example, DEI programs are often compared to the Salem witch trials, to totalitarian regimes in the Soviet Union, mind control. They're compared even to the Cultural Revolution in China. These are all nonsensical, glittering generalities, which seem to paint a picture of reality, but bear very little connection to the actual circumstances of what happens on campuses. And all kinds of invented terms, coddling, safetyism, wokeism, these are abstractions used to describe the alleged state of universities today. Next slide, please. But also a lot of quantitative information that gets filtered through these kinds of rhetorical lenses. There's lots of misinterpretation of polling data. Most college campuses, when we look at in the aggregate meta surveys, the idea of campuses being these regimes of indoctrination or hostility to free speech, at large, the data doesn't support that. young people tend to be more tolerant on college campuses compared to other parts of society for free speech and individual rights. But there's a lot of cherry picking that's been going on recently. And also some very suspect question wording and ordering of questions in opinion surveys. So next slide, please. Just drawing these two kinds of streams of misinformation together, I'll leave you with this example. And I'd love to hear other examples or strategies here in the talk afterward. Here's a national public radio finding from several years ago. All of these claims that are being made, you see in terms of the language here, half of professors in an NPR survey have used trigger warnings. That's false. They're talking about a survey where they got 800 individual responses for a voluntary survey. Do you use trigger warnings? The United States has 4,800 different post-secondary institutions. So you can't go from 800 surveys, which is a scintilla of all the people who teach on college campuses, to say there's some dangerous trend happening with trigger warnings in universities writ large. So this is an example of what I'm talking about. We have both those rhetorical and quantitative pieces of misinformation. And then the final slide, as a way to think about the discussion that's coming up, I often advocate, think about these language choices and these broad claims, examine methodologies and the context for how certain data points are being used, and insist on multiple forms of evidence. Individual poll results or miscellaneous anecdotes about what might have happened with an invited speaker on a university campus, this is not a robust cross-section of evidence. So these are the kinds of critical thinking strategies I recommend, and I'm very interested in hearing more from others in a few minutes. Thank you so much.
I wanted to transition to our final lightning talk speaker today, Beales, an award-winning speaker, educator, academic, writer, and entrepreneur with over 15 years of experience in the field of communication. Cy brings a dynamic blend of insight and creativity to help people improve performance, build lifelong habits, and become future ready. We're thankful to have us here today.
That's great. Thank you. I'm going to start my timer. Hi, I'm Cy. Yes, next slide, please. Yeah, so I just to say that essentially I've been an academic, I guess on and off for the last sort of 18 years, but previously I was in the marketing and fashion industry. I was at NTU for 12 years. Then I escaped, and then I came back to one day a week at Leeds School of Art and Design. And I teach there, and I want to choose a couple of examples, I guess, from my life and my time there. So I'm teaching a bunch of second year students, really, lovely people, very engaged, but I make a reference, they're learning fashion marketing. I make a reference to Savile Row, the most famous street in the world where, suits are made and a key part of fashion and that kind of thing. And virtually, in fact, none of them know it. So it's like, you then start to think, okay, well, how do I begin to teach when I'm in a situation where I almost have to go back to these fairly basic cultural references or these fairly basic ideas and kind of then go back forwards again? And then next slide, please. We're developing a documentary. It's a little bit like the Michael Moore one where he goes off about where do we invade next. So we basically want to travel through Europe to Norway, Denmark, and eventually end up in Estonia, because they took most of what's great in learning and then they made it into their system and really changed their education system, and they're kind of top of the charts. And I was talking to a documentary maker about various documentary makers, other filmmakers, but also about the Sheffield Documentary Festival, and they weren't aware of it. And it's like, well, that's one of the biggest festivals in the world, documentaries. So I guess the point I'm saying, by no means do I know lots of things, and there are many references that I don't understand, but it makes learning and teaching so much more difficult when you the kind of basic stuff, the very basic stuff in many ways is absent. So next slide, please. So I think this, from a teaching perspective, is becoming a critical problem, but also from a learning perspective, it's a critical problem, because when you say the word critical thinking, it doesn't really feel relevant. It doesn't feel of this time. It doesn't feel like something that we potentially should be teaching. And yet it's something that we do every day. And I think one of the biggest things that we're trying to do at Sidedoor Studios is connect ideas like critical thinking, curiosity, collaboration, complex problem solving with the day-to-day lives of the people that we're working with. And essentially, we're trying to make these things or communicate that these are human skills. Mostly you've had them all of your life. Probably you have had them all of your life. They maybe been schooled out of you in some ways, and now you kind of got to rediscover them. So we're very much about learning from the ground up, social learning, informal learning. In many ways, we don't really feel that the traditional existing academic model, traditional school model of a top-down, very subject-based, very prescribed, exam-marked model doesn't really work. And I think there's a lot of research to show that. And the reality is, if you're going to spend up to 20,000 hours in education and you're going to spend 80,000 hours working, but you've had very, very little actually to help you understand human skills, that's a real issue. Next slide, please. So I think the other thing as well is, oh my goodness, my time's going so quickly. In real life, many of the people we're trying to teach, gaming, cooking, creativity, work, sport, are using critical thinking. But unfortunately, they're not connecting it with the critical thinking that we talk about at university. So next slide, please. These go so quickly, it's amazing. So next slide. So I think one of the biggest problems is that thing that it's learning, that it's academic, that it's education, that it's boring, that it's old-fashioned, it's traditional. And what we're trying to do is rethink it. And I think sometimes maybe we need to think about how we rebrand the word. Is it informed thinking? Is it reflective thinking? Is this about reasoned thinking? We use very old-fashioned words. I'm a senior lecturer, but actually I very, very rarely lecture. I'm much more doing other things. So we want to connect that with exploring, questioning, challenging, evaluating, connecting, but make sure that connects to the real life of the people we're working with. Next slide, please. So what we do is at Sidedoor Studios, we create content, training, and events. So the one we're launching next month is actually called What the F Do I Do Now? Because it's aimed at graduates in terms of like very different graduate market. AI is trying to help them think about where they can go and how to design and build a happy career. So we're about demystifying things. We're about how you find employment that's happy. We're about how you cope with AI, thought partnership, critical thinking, creative concept development, that kind of thing. But very much, oh, my time has gone off. I'm going to do one more minute if that's okay. About demystifying. Goodness me, I should have practiced more. Can we now have the next slide?
Yes, it's okay. You can have a minute.
Can I carry on for 2 minutes?
Oh, now you're asking a lot. Yes, go for it.
All right. So what we do is we focus on human skills, and it's very much about lifelong habits. We look at things like atomic habits and the BJ Fogg work and things like that. But particularly, I think the research that we found when we got a Creative Catalyst grant from the UK government was that people are very alienated from learning. They feel the idea of learning, particularly in the UK, is not something they enjoy. So in the UK, 5% will carry on learning after formal education. Scandinavian countries, about 45%. So we're trying to flip it and make learning from the ground up so it feels human, engaging, you take your own path, you see it to be all those kind of things. And the last slide I'll look at is one of the things we do a lot, if we could have the next slide, is we try to use models. So the C's are not new, but we've developed the 7 C's. So we talk about models: curiosity, critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, all the ones you can see on the screen. But the way they relate in real life is I bumped into a student who had been to an interview, and she challenged the interviewer about using the term Gen Z. And she said, well, actually, that's very, generalist. It's not very helpful. And that helped her get the job. Another student started talking about her collaboration. And I think that one of the ways we can improve the way we all learn human skills and develop habits is by having simple models. So we've developed models for soft skills, for creativity, for finding employability, for mental health, to try and have little hooks you can hang things on that then build into build into skills and become habits. And that was very quick. I'm sorry, but I hope that was useful. That's me.
Thank you. No worries. That's the nature of lightning talks.
Definitely lightning.
My colleagues from public libraries from my previous position would certainly agree with you about people failing to connect things they learn in an academic setting to their real lives, and that's one of the big struggles for them. So thank you for highlighting the importance of critical thinking in real-world problem solving. This was a great exploration of how questioning, challenging, evaluating, and connecting ideas can lead to informed, reflective, and reasoned thinking. So now we're going to transition to breakout rooms for more in-depth discussions on the topics you just heard. We're also going to have time to address some of the Q&A that's been building up in the chat after the lightning talks. Thank you so much. Enjoy your breakouts. So please join me in welcoming back all of our speakers. This certainly has been an informative and engaging event filled with valuable insights and thought-provoking ideas and more questions than we had time to answer. So to wrap up these discussions, Dr. Hill, Dr. Vivian, and Mr. Beales, in that order, will provide some concluding remarks. No pressure, but Dr. Hill, could you wrap up your thoughts?
Yes. I had, these prepared closing comments, and I'm not going to read them. I'm not going to take the full 5 minutes. I have to say, I am just blown away by the questions that were coming in during the different lightning talks and during the keynote speech, and then also in the breakout room. As I shared with the breakout room attendees, I had this scenario prepared, and we were going to, talk through the various ways that we can engage a specific student in how to, think more critically about a particular kind of controversial situation. And we didn't do that. We went to questions, and the level of thought-provoking questions that were there. I got to tell you all, you have invigorated me to the point where I've already in my head come up with like 3 different articles that I could write based on what was discussed in the room. I want to say thank you for that. You know how there's a saying that you never know what someone's going through, right? Well, I'm not going through too much, right? But in terms of my career, sometimes I feel very stagnant. And today's interactions have really reignited my why. And I just want to say thank you for that. And want to just maybe end by saying, please let's be intentional, right? The kinds of thought-provoking questions that came out today show that there is a true and a deep commitment to making sure that students, yes, but people in general are interested in and remain engaged in making transformative change in our world. And we can't lose sight of that. So I'm just going to ask everyone, please be intentional about the things that we're saying, the questions that we're asking, the encouragement that we're giving people to think more deeply and to not just accept things that are just, passing in front of us. And that's what I have for my closing remarks. Thank you all so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hill. Dr. Vivian?
Okay, yes, I want to echo Dr. Hill's thoughts. I really enjoyed my brief time with people, again, coming from so many different contexts, but I think there's something powerful to have the sense that we are indeed gathering here virtually from so many different places, and yet there's one topic in particular that keeps coming up, which is AI. And I think that's significant because it's significant by itself, but also, as we were discussing a little bit in our breakout session, it points up a lot of long gestating forms of cynicism and frustration and even kinds of crises about where our educational institutions are right now and where they're going. And so the question was how to use AI, how to address its use, how to turn the presence of AI into a critical thinking exercise itself. And I think we seem to be generally agreed that this is a momentous potential change in how education is done, but therefore I too kind of felt a passion for helping students understand their world by understanding where AI is coming from, what it does and what it doesn't do. So the biggest recommendation we came up with was to make sure that students and learning communities and possibly in grade school, for example, even parents know that this is a corporate marketed tool. It's coming from outside of educational spaces. It's heavily funded, and that it's important to kind of almost tell the story of where AI is coming from and what it's designed to do. And what it's not designed to do is by itself as a direct outcome aid human intelligence and critical thinking and basic old-fashioned analytic skills. It's not something that helps us talk across cultures and across difference and raise questions about authority, about the canon and so forth. So that kind of showing what it's designed to do and what it's not designed to do should probably become more of just a practical thing in our teaching practices. And it was also good to hear, by the same token, that there are larger issues it brings up, which I think transcend AI and will always be with us. And one trope we came up with is about the difference between general knowledge and deeper knowledge. AI points up the question of what are students and families and so forth being prepared to expect from their course of education, just to get a certain amount of general knowledge and various skills and kind of automatically go on a career path, or to generate the kind of deeper knowledge that Dr. Hill was talking about in reference with DEI, or one or two commenters in our breakout session were talking about in terms of decolonizing the academy and so forth, sort of asking about where these structures came from, these structures of knowledge and teaching and information sharing, and asking how they could be different, how we could transform them in order to promote a more democratic understanding of knowledge, a more cross-cultural understanding of research and so forth. We're at a moment where particularly people who oppose that kind of deep sense of academic freedom do not like people raising those questions. So if anything, I sensed a commitment to finding ways to go forward with those questions, to connect these issues of critical thinking, information, misinformation, positive uses of technology with misuses of it, to that larger rubric of academic freedom for how we practically use education to make people's lives better, in essence. So I'm grateful for the breakout session for pointing out those issues. And I think there was tremendous resonance with things that were said before in the other talks.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. And Mr. Beales? You're muted.
Aha. So I was just saying, I've really enjoyed today, and thank you so much for inviting me, but also for all of the interesting comments. I agree. I've found it fascinating. I guess there are a number of things that I won't be too long, but I think the first thing in many ways is we all have to go back to try and think about how and why people learn, and reconnect things like critical thinking with that, along with the other human skills or soft skills. So, it's that sense of purpose. Why am I doing this as an individual? How is it going to help me change? How is it going to help me drive forward? It's how am I going to apply it? And I think that's one of the critical things. So if we can make a bridge between critical thinking and how you will apply it and how it will help you, that will help motivate you. It's how you make it into a habit and then you strengthen it. All of these things that we, when we think about pedagogy and hootagogy and all those kind of things. But how do we actually genuinely scaffold these things so that you just don't even think about critical thinking? It's like riding a bike. You just do it. I think the second thing is that, and I guess the follow on from that is taking it out the classroom and taking it into everyday circumstances. And we do that, in when we're when we're debating with somebody, or when we're in a restaurant, or when we're looking at a film, or we're whatever, we're using it. So let's just almost kind of note it a little bit and see how much we use it every day. I think the thing with AI is really, really difficult, because the universities and many of the management of the universities were so behind the curve, and they've been so just behind, really, almost criminally, in understanding what was happening with AI. Then what they did was they massively overreacted and made many, many students incredibly scared because of plagiarism and things like that. So when I encourage my students to use AI for things like thought partnership, concept development, creative visualization, but obviously I'm countering that by saying this is flawed, this is commercial, this is that. But the reality is that in the creative industries, 80% of people at the moment are using AI all the time. It's just become like Word. It's just being used. So you have to understand it, but you have to understand, and I think that's the really interesting comment about knowledge and wisdom, that this is actually about wisdom. And if you look at the World Economic Forum top 10 skills, critical thinking, curiosity, creativity, and you say to your students, this is what's going to help you be future-proof. But I think the very last thing I'd say is my last slide, which I didn't get to because I rambled on a bit too much, was anger as an energy. It's John Lydon. I'm an old punk. And basically, I'm more liberal. I'm more on the left. I would basically say Oh, am I unmuted?
No,
Can you
I
hear
can
me?
hear you.
Oh, sorry, I've got a thing saying host spotlight your video for everyone. So I think the last thing really is that collectively, if we want to defend and promote and support critical thinking, we have to come together in a really smart way and work out ways where we can make it seem much more relevant, make it simple. Maybe it's models, maybe it's other things, maybe it's social media, maybe it's celebrities speaking out or whatever. But we just help people understand how fundamental curiosity and critical thinking is, because they're the basis of all the other skills. And so we have to just unite in some way against the enemies of critical thinking. I know that sounds like a politician, but for me, I'm so passionate about it because I see it with my own children, and it's just, you know, it's fundamental to us really moving forward and being a fair and equal society. And then I'll get off my soapbox.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. And thank you, everyone. Everyone, please join me in a round of virtual applause for our Lightning Talk speakers. If I could figure out how to do that. Ah, there we go. We have 6 whole minutes left, and we can use them in Q&A. So I'm going to pull a few questions from the Q&A, but apologies ahead of time that I'm not going to be able to get to everybody. We'll do the best we can. So here's a question. What strategies are best to counteract the infuriating conundrum of the Dunning-Kruger effect?
I don't know.
All right, well, we can go to another one if nobody wants to jump on that.
Anybody? Yeah. Do we want to explain that a bit more, or?
So, well, the Dunning-Kruger effect is basically people not realizing how much they don't know. So
Right.
they have confidence in
I should know.
their own expertise. It's sort of an extension of the quote that we had earlier about people being confident when they shouldn't be and doubting themselves when they shouldn't be. Dunning-Kruger is a particular research paper that finds that people who don't know how much there is to know that they don't know overestimate their expertise on the subject. But
That's what I've just done. Yeah.
no, because you knew you didn't know.
Oh,
and you
yes, I knew I
asked.
didn't know. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I think university classrooms are some of the best spaces we have to interrupt that effect. Because in my opinion, if a university, most university classrooms don't come down to quote unquote conservative versus liberal ideas. They just come down to ideas. And we test out those ideas with evidence that ideally breaks people out of the kind of channels of bias that they normally get into. Cross-cultural communication, learning about people from very different contexts. It's hard to sit in a room with people who are well informed from other perspectives and try and hold fast to what essentially is a very misinformed view of the world. I think a lot of social science studies find people either want to get out of that room or they find their ideas moderated. So
I think if you also help people understand that everything really is pretty much a social construct. So I do quite a lot of training and workshops. I did one the other day with a satellite imagery company, and I used the example of the Mercator map, and the fact that the map we all use doesn't really represent the size of the countries. And then the idea that we used to think there were X amount of planets, and now we say there are Y amount of planets. And it's just when you're talking or working with, particularly with younger people, and just saying, that isn't true, or is that true, or actually who says that that's the way it is that a model? Is somebody lying to you? Is that, and you just bring it back to, like, I mean literally the map of the world we use doesn't reflect the size of the countries. Greenland's crazy, but we just think it does. And then as soon as you kind of get that idea, it's like, oh, things are a social construct, then you start to begin. And I think that, the more we do that, the more we say, is that true? Could we ask better questions about that? The classic one I also use is in where I live in Nottingham. There's a bridge, and on one side of the bridge, the health kind of like index of people is like number 6 in the country, but on the other side of the bridge, it's 350th, and it's like, well, just a bridge is separating you, but these people are very different from these people, but you don't necessarily think they are. So I think, again, so much of, and probably a bit boring about it, is bringing it back to real life context. and then trying to then bring it back into how you make that into tools and techniques and things.
I want to just add to that very quickly. One of the least effective ways to combat it is to tell people outright that they're wrong. That shuts everything down, right? And then another thing is to stay curious, to genuinely be curious about why people believe the way that they do, and to get them to wonder, well, why do I believe that? And why do other people think differently? So,
yeah.
How do we encourage critical thinking among students when the academic setting we're in itself has restrictions on what can be said or thought, or sometimes it's people have referred to it as protocols, consensus, rules, laws in different questions, but it's really all the same issue.
Very big question, isn't it? I mean, you know, in the UK, obviously we have, you know, significant issues, but I mean, from what I read and hear in the States, you know, I don't know how you go to work every day sometimes, because it's just must be so difficult to maintain your independent, rigorous, critical thinking. I think the only thing really for me is about developing good relationships with students, and they trust you, they feel you're authentic, and you know, hopefully they question some of the things they're hearing. But also, one of the reasons I left university is because I was always kicking back and going, no, this is wrong. We shouldn't be doing like this. Those learning outcomes are rubbish, whatever. And I couldn't really survive in such a rigid kind of, I just prefer being out my own. I'm really bad in large organizations. So I just like think, if you have got a good pension and you're close to leaving, just challenge everything that's being said to management, and try to bring in different systems and different approaches, because, you know, currently in the UK, we've got a huge crisis in higher education. I mean, 4 out of 10 unis, you know, in deficit. We've got massive issues with, you know, whether it's how you talk to people or what you say, or just, I mean, I feel really scared about some of the words that I might say, because I just think, oh my goodness, I don't want to do something. But anyway, I'll stop whispering. It's really hard. I just think we have to be authentic and we have to be true, and then see what happens.
Anyone have anything to add?
Just briefly, yeah, particularly speaking of the US context and what Dr. Hill mentioned with outright state censorship of anything that quote unquote smacks of DEI is at the forefront of this. But I think it's important to, as educators, use the rights that we have in the classroom, and that there are many histories of authoritarian systems and educational systems in which people understood that it's a process of getting the message across, that there are always ways to share that information, even in times of massive suppression, which are much harsher than what we're experiencing now so far, knock on wood. But that as an educator, it is about getting information across. And so that these forms of banning and censorship are often so crude and ignorant in and of themselves in terms of where they come from, that too is a critical thinking exercise. How do we communicate and share information even when the surveillors are looking for it, but might not recognize it in new and creative forms?
Dr. Hill, did you want to add anything?
I have nothing else to contribute because they've said it perfectly.
Wonderful. So on that note, I'm going to end, even though there's so many more questions that we can explore, but I do want to thank you all for contributing such great questions. Good questions are essential to critical thinking. Thank you for everyone who raised them. Your contributions have helped us deliver another fantastic event, and I'm sure they will inform the development of the next one and everything in between. In the meantime, I encourage you all to take these discussions back to your respective institutions, and of course to Blue Sky and X and any place else where the scholarly dialogue continues. And we can continue to foster a culture of critical thinking and open dialogue together. Thank you for your active participation and for making this event a success.